"Name your price," the vampire lord said, his crimson eyes fixed on her trembling hands as she clutched the marriage contract. "But know that once you sign, you belong to me, body, soul, and the destiny you've never imagined." Wait, before the next revelation happens, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. Elena Thorne's fingers trembled not from fear, but from the weight of her family's desperation pressing down upon her shoulders like a shroud. The candle-lit study of the Ravencrest estate felt suffocating, its ancient tapestries seeming to whisper secrets of centuries past. Before her sat Dorian Ravencrest, the most feared vampire lord in all the northern territories, his pale skin luminescent in the flickering light, his dark hair swept back to reveal the sharp angles of his immortal face. 50,000 gold pieces, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. That's what my father owes your associates. Dorian's laugh was like velvet draped over steel. Your father owes me considerably more than gold, Miss Thorne. He owes me entertainment. He rose from his leather chair with predatory grace, moving around the massive oak desk until he stood mere inches from her. You see, I've grown quite bored in my 3 centuries of existence. A mortal bride might provide stimulation. Elena forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. She had heard the stories, how Dorian Ravencrest had built his empire on the blood of those who crossed him, how he commanded legions of vampires and owned half the lands from here to the Eastern Sea. Yet here she sat, negotiating her own fate like a commodity at market. "My family's debt dies with this marriage," she stated, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "And I want it in writing." Bold, his eyes glittered with something that might have been approval. "Very well. But understand this, Elena Thorne." Her name rolled off his tongue like a caress and a threat. "Once you become my wife, you become part of my world. There is no returning to your simple mortal existence." She thought of her younger brother Marcus, barely sick with the wasting fever that required expensive medicines. She thought of her sister Lydia, who deserved a dowry that would secure her a good marriage rather than condemning her to spinsterhood. She thought of her parents, aged beyond their years from worry and poverty. "I understand," she said, reaching for the quill. Dorian's hand covered hers, his skin cold as marble. "Do you? Because I don't think you comprehend what you're truly agreeing to." His thumb traced across her knuckles, and she shivered at the contact. "You're not just agreeing to be my wife. You're agreeing to rule beside me, to make decisions that will affect thousands of lives, to bear the weight of a crown you never wanted." Elena's breath caught. "A crown? Did you think I was merely some wealthy merchant with unusual dietary habits?" His smile revealed the tips of his fangs. "I am the alpha of the Northern Vampire Coven, Elena. My territory spans 3 kingdoms. My subjects number in the tens of thousands, vampires, humans, and everything in between. Marry me, and you become their queen." The quill slipped from her nerveless fingers. "That's impossible. I'm nobody. A blacksmith's daughter from a village so small it doesn't even have a name. Perhaps that's precisely why you're perfect for the role." Dorian retrieved the fallen quill, offering it to her once more. The last vampire queen was born to nobility. She ruled with cruelty and died by assassination 3 decades ago. Since then, I've governed alone. But my council grows restless. They want stability. They want a queen who understands suffering, who won't forget the common people in her rise to power. Elena stared at the contract, the words blurring before her eyes. Marriage, crown, queen. It was too much, too overwhelming. What if I refuse? Then your family's debt remains, and I find another way to collect. His voice carried no malice, only fact. But I think you're stronger than you know, Elena Thorne. I think you'll surprise us all. She thought of Marcus, pale and thin in his sickbed. She thought of Lydia, beautiful and intelligent, but condemned to a life of servitude without a proper dowry. She thought of her parents, who had sacrificed everything for their children. Elena signed her name with swift, decisive strokes. The moment the ink dried, the air in the study seemed to shift, becoming charged with an energy she couldn't name. Dorian's eyes flashed with something primal and satisfied. Excellent! The ceremony will take place in 3 days' time. He moved to a cabinet and withdrew a small velvet box. This was my mother's. She was mortal once, like you. The ring inside was exquisite, a blood-red ruby surrounded by diamonds, set in silver that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. As Dorian slipped it onto her finger, Elena gasped. The metal felt warm against her skin, and for a moment she could have sworn she heard whispers in a language she didn't recognize. "What is this?" she asked, staring at the ring. "A bond," Dorian said simply. "It will protect you, but it will also change you. Nothing that belongs to me remains entirely mortal for long." Before Elena could ask what he meant, the study door burst open. A tall, elegant woman with silver hair and violet eyes swept in, her movements too fluid to be entirely human. "Dorian, you cannot be serious." The woman's voice carried a crisp authority that suggested she was accustomed to being obeyed. "A mortal bride! Have you lost your mind entirely?" "Morgana." Dorian's tone held warning. "Meet my betrothed, Elena Thorne. Elena, this is Morgana Blackthorne, my advisor and the leader of my council." Morgana's violet gaze raked over Elena with undisguised disdain. She's a child, a human child who probably doesn't even know which fork to use for the salad course, let alone how to rule supernatural beings. "I know enough," Elena said, standing slowly. The ring on her finger pulsed warm against her skin, and she felt an unexpected surge of confidence. "I know that respect is earned, not given based on bloodline. And I know that looking down on someone because of their origins says more about you than it does about them." Morgana's eyes widened slightly. "How dare you?" "How dare I speak honestly?" Elena stepped forward, that strange warmth from the ring spreading up her arm. "Isn't that what you need in a queen? Someone who won't simply nod and agree with everything you say?" Dorian's low chuckle filled the sudden silence. "I told you she'd surprise us all." Morgana's gaze flicked between Elena and Dorian, her expression calculating. "The council will never accept her. She has no training, no understanding of our laws, our customs." "Then train her," Dorian said simply. "You have 3 days before the wedding and a lifetime afterward. I suggest you begin immediately." The older woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "And if she proves inadequate?" Then I'll deal with the consequences. Dorian's voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. But I have a feeling our Elena will prove more resourceful than any of us anticipate. As Morgana swept from the room with obvious displeasure, Elena sank back into her chair, the full weight of what she'd agreed to settling upon her shoulders. "Second thoughts?" Dorian asked, his voice gentler now. "Third and fourth thoughts," Elena admitted. "But it doesn't matter. I've made my choice." "Good, because tomorrow your real education begins." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Elena, your family's debt is forgiven as of this moment. Your brother will receive the finest medical care available, and your sister will have a dowry that will make her the most sought-after bride in 3 kingdoms." Elena's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Dorian said, his hand on the doorknob. "Wait until you see what I'm asking you to become." After he left, Elena sat alone in the flickering candlelight, staring at the ring on her finger. The ruby seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, and she could swear she heard whispers growing stronger, more insistent. She pressed her free hand to her temple, trying to make sense of the words that seemed to be coming from inside her own mind. Power, ancient, blood, destiny. "This is madness," she whispered to the empty room. But even as she spoke the words, Elena Thorne knew there was no turning back. In 3 days, she would marry a vampire lord and become queen of a world she didn't understand. The only question was whether she would survive long enough to figure out what that truly meant. The next morning arrived far too quickly. Elena woke in a guest chamber of the Ravencrest estate, sunlight streaming through heavy velvet curtains that had been left partially open. She had expected to sleep poorly in this strange place, but instead had fallen into the deepest, most restful sleep of her life. The ring still pulsed warm on her finger, and the whispers in her mind had grown clearer. Strong, chosen, worthy. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, sitting up in the massive 4-poster bed. Morgana swept in, followed by 3 other women Elena didn't recognize. The vampire council member looked no more pleased than she had the night before, but her expression was businesslike rather than openly hostile. "Your education begins now. These are my assistants. Vera, who will teach you court protocol, Isabel, who will handle your wardrobe and presentation, and Catherine, who will instruct you in the supernatural laws that govern our world." The 3 women curtsied, their movements precise and graceful. Elena noted that none of them were entirely human. Vera's eyes held flecks of gold that suggested she was part fae. Isabel's unnaturally pale skin and sharp canines marked her as vampire-born, and Catherine's aura practically hummed with magical energy. "We have much work to do and little time to do it," Morgana continued. "The wedding ceremony alone requires knowledge of 7 different supernatural rituals, and that's before we even begin discussing your duties as queen." Elena rose from the bed, wrapping her silk robe more tightly around herself. "Then we'd better get started." The next several hours passed in a blur of information. Elena learned that Dorian's kingdom was not recognized by human authorities, but held significant power in the supernatural world. His territory included 2 major cities, dozens of smaller settlements, and vast tracts of wilderness where various supernatural creatures lived under his protection. The vampires are organized into houses based on bloodline and ability, Catherine explained, as they sat in the estate's library surrounded by ancient tomes and scrolls. House Ravencrest is the royal house, but there are 6 other major houses, each with their own specialties and territories. House Shadowmere controls the eastern ports, Vera added, consulting a leather-bound ledger.
House Nightfall oversees the mountain regions. House Bloodmoon manages relations with the werewolf clans. House Darkthorn handles military matters. House Silvermoon governs the magical districts. And House Ironwolf controls the industrial areas where humans and vampires work together. Elena's head spun with the complexity of it all.
And they all answer to Dorian? To Dorian, and soon to you, Morgana said curtly. Each house has a representative on the Royal Council. They will expect you to understand their concerns, their histories, their feuds, and alliances. A wrong word or gesture could spark conflicts that last for decades. No pressure, Elena muttered, earning a sharp look from Morgana. Isabel, the vampire-born assistant, laid out an array of dresses on the library table. Your wardrobe must reflect your new status while remaining practical. You'll need gowns for formal occasions, riding habits for travel through the territories, and ceremonial robes for supernatural rituals. Elena fingered the rich fabrics, silks and velvets and deep jewel tones, all beautifully made, but unlike anything she'd ever owned. These must have cost more than my family's entire yearly income. Cost is irrelevant, Morgana said dismissively. You are to be queen. You must look the part. As the day wore on, Elena began to understand the true scope of what she'd agreed to. The supernatural kingdom Dorian ruled was vast and complex, with its own economy, justice system, and international relations. Vampires weren't the only supernatural beings under his protection. There were werewolves, fae, witches, shapeshifters, and even some humans who had chosen to live in the supernatural world rather than the mortal one. Why do humans choose to live here? Elena asked during a brief break for lunch. Catherine smiled for the first time that day. Safety, mostly. The supernatural world has stricter laws about protecting the innocent. A human who is wronged here has recourse to justice that they might never find in the mortal world. Plus, Vera added, many humans have supernatural children or spouses. Mixed families often find acceptance here that they can't find elsewhere. Elena thought of her own family, all fully human as far as she knew.
What about my family? Will they be safe? Safer than they've ever been, Morgana said, her tone softer than usual. Dorian has already assigned protection to them. Your brother is being cared for by the finest healers in the kingdom. Your sister will have her choice of suitors from the noble houses, and your parents will want for nothing. Relief flooded through Elena. Whatever she faced in her new life, at least her family would be secure. That evening, Dorian joined her for dinner in the estate's formal dining room. Elena wore one of her new gowns, deep emerald silk that brought out her eyes, and she noticed his appreciative glance when she entered the room. "How was your first day of queen lessons?" he asked, gesturing for her to sit across from him at the polished mahogany table. "Overwhelming," Elena admitted, accepting a glass of wine from a silent servant. "I had no idea your kingdom was so extensive. Most humans don't. We've found it safer to remain largely invisible to mortal authorities." Dorian cut into his steak, very rare, Elena noted, with elegant precision. "But you're adapting well, according to Morgana." Elena nearly choked on her wine. Morgana said that? She said, and I quote, "The girl has potential, though she needs considerable work on her curtsy." Dorian's eyes twinkled with amusement. High praise from Morgana. "I'm still not sure I believe any of this is real," Elena confessed. "Yesterday I was a blacksmith's daughter. Today I'm learning to rule supernatural beings. Tomorrow I marry a vampire lord. It feels like a dream. Or a nightmare?" Dorian's voice was carefully neutral. Elena considered the question seriously. "No, strange as it sounds, it doesn't feel like a nightmare. It feels like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be, even though I have no idea what I'm doing." Dorian leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating crimson eyes. The ring is working faster than I anticipated. Elena touched the ruby at her throat where she'd moved it to wear as a pendant. What do you mean? The ring doesn't just mark you as mine, it connects you to the ancient magic that flows through this land, through my bloodline. Over time, it will awaken abilities you never knew you had. Abilities? Elena's voice rose slightly. What kind of abilities? That depends on who you truly are. Dorian's smile was mysterious. The ring only responds to those with supernatural heritage. The fact that you can wear it at all suggests you're not as purely mortal as you believe. Elena stared at him in shock. That's impossible. My parents are both completely human. My grandparents? My great-grandparents? Bloodlines have a way of hiding themselves, Dorian said gently, especially when survival depends on it. Tell me, Elena, have you ever had dreams that felt more real than waking? Ever known things you shouldn't know? Ever felt drawn to the moonlight, to storms, to the wild places where normal humans fear to tread? Elena's mouth went dry. She'd experienced all of those things, but she'd always attributed them to an overactive imagination. You think I'm, what, part vampire? Not vampire, but something else. Something that makes you compatible with our world in ways a purely mortal woman could never be. Dorian reached across the table and took her hand. The ring will help awaken whatever heritage lies dormant in your blood, but it will happen gradually so your human side can adjust. What if I don't want whatever's in my blood to awaken? Dorian's grip on her hand tightened. Then you'll fight it, and the conflict will likely drive you mad. Or you'll embrace it and discover powers you never dreamed possible. His eyes met hers. The choice is yours, Elena, but I should warn you, the awakening has already begun. The ring cannot be removed once it's accepted you. Elena pulled her hand free and stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the estate's gardens. In the moonlight, she could see creatures moving among the shadows, creatures that definitely weren't human. You should have told me all this before I signed the contract. Would you have signed it if I had? Elena considered this. She thought of Marcus in his sickbed, of Lydia's limited prospects, of her parents' worry and desperation. Yes, she said finally, I would have signed it anyway. My family needed me to. Then nothing has changed. Everything has changed. Elena spun to face him. You're telling me I'm not who I thought I was? That I'm going to develop supernatural abilities? That I'm connected to ancient magic? How is that not a complete change? Dorian rose and moved to stand beside her at the window. Because you're still Elena Thorne. You're still the woman who was willing to sacrifice herself for her family. You're still brave, intelligent, and stubborn enough to argue with a vampire lord. He touched her cheek gently. The magic will enhance who you already are, not change your fundamental nature. Elena leaned into his touch despite herself. There was something about Dorian that drew her, something beyond mere physical attraction. What was your mother like? You said she was mortal once. Beautiful, strong, terrified at first, like you. Dorian's voice grew distant with memory. She was a merchant's daughter, given to my father as payment for a debt, not unlike your family situation. But she adapted, learned, grew into her power. By the time she died, she was the most formidable queen the supernatural world had ever seen. How did she die? Dorian's jaw tightened. Assassinated by a faction that wanted to see our kingdom fall into chaos. They succeeded for a while. Without her stabilizing influence, the houses began to war among themselves. It took me decades to restore order. Elena heard the pain in his voice, the loss that still haunted him after 30 years. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be strong. Be smart. Be everything she was, but in your own way. Dorian turned to face her fully.
I chose you not just because you were available, Elena. I chose you because something in your eyes reminded me of her strength. The ring confirming your supernatural heritage is simply a bonus.
What if I fail?
Then we both fail. But I don't think you will. His confidence in her was both reassuring and terrifying. Now, tomorrow is your final day of preparation before the wedding. Morgana has arranged for you to meet with representatives from each of the houses. It will be your first real test as future queen. Elena nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. I'll be ready. I know you will. Dorian lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. Sweet dreams, my queen. As he left her alone in the dining room, Elena touched her palm where his lips had been. The skin tingled with residual warmth, and the ring's pulse seemed to sync with her own heartbeat. Whatever tomorrow brought, there was no turning back now. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching Elena's nervous mood. She dressed carefully in a midnight blue gown that Isabel had selected, its elegant lines designed to convey authority while remaining modest enough not to offend any of the more traditional house representatives. Morgana arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, her expression more serious than usual. Today you meet the council. Remember everything we've taught you, but more importantly, trust your instincts. The ring will help you sense who can be trusted and who cannot. They made their way to the estate's formal reception hall, a grand room with soaring ceilings and portraits of past Ravencrest rulers lining the walls. 7 chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing a single ornate throne that would be Elena's seat. The representatives arrived in order of house seniority. Lord Marcus Shadowmere was a distinguished vampire with silver-streaked hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to see everything. Lady Cordelia Nightfall appeared to be barely 20, but carried herself with ancient authority. Lord Garrett Bloodmoon was massive and scarred, clearly as much wolf as vampire. Lady Seraphina Darkthorn wore her military bearing like armor, her posture rigid and alert. Lord Adrian Silvermoon practically hummed with magical energy, his violet eyes similar to Morgana's. And finally, Lady Victoria Ironwolf, whose practical clothing and calloused hands spoke of someone who worked alongside her people rather than simply ruling them. Lords and ladies of the council, Morgana announced formally, I present Elena Forn, betrothed to Lord Dorian Ravencrest and your future queen. Elena rose from the throne, inclining her head respectfully to each representative. The ring pulsed warm against her skin, and suddenly she could sense emotions from each council member. Wariness from Shadowmere, curiosity from Nightfall, amusement from Bloodmoon, skepticism from Darkthorn, intrigue from Silvermoon, and cautious optimism from Ironwolf. My lords and ladies, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, I know my appointment as queen comes as a surprise. I know you have concerns about my inexperience and my mortal origins. I share those concerns. Lord Shadowmere raised an eyebrow. Refreshing honesty, at least. I cannot promise to be the queen you expect, Elena continued, but I can promise to be the queen you need. I will learn your laws, understand your histories, and work to preserve the peace and prosperity of our kingdom. Our kingdom? Lady Darkthorn's voice was sharp. You've lived here for 2 days, child. What makes you think you understand what our people need? The ring's warmth intensified, and Elena felt a surge of certainty that surprised her. Because I've lived as one of the powerless, Lady Darkthorn. I know what it feels like to be overlooked, dismissed, treated as if my opinions don't matter because of my birth circumstances. If I can remember that feeling, I'll never make the mistake of ignoring the needs of those who serve us.
Lady Nightfall leaned forward, her ancient eyes bright with interest. "And what do you think our people need, future queen?" Elena closed her eyes for a moment, letting the ring's magic flow through her. Images flashed in her mind, glimpses of the kingdom she had yet to see. Vampire children playing in moonlit gardens, werewolf families farming the mountain slopes, fae artisans creating impossible beauty, human families living safely under supernatural protection. "They need to know that their queen sees them," she said, opening her eyes. "All of them, not just the noble houses, but the workers and the farmers and the crafters. They need to know that their traditions and cultures are valued, and they need to know that they have a voice in their own governance." Lord Silvermoon sat back with a thoughtful expression. "Interesting. And how do you propose to ensure they have this voice?" "Regular audiences. Not just formal petitions, but scheduled times when anyone can bring concerns directly to the throne. Tours of the territories, so I can see conditions firsthand. And," Elena paused, the idea forming as she spoke, "representatives from the common people on the council. Not just the noble houses, but voices from every level of our society." The council members exchanged glances. Lady Ironwolf was the first to speak. "That's actually not a terrible idea. We've grown somewhat isolated in our positions of authority." Lord Bloodmoon's rumbling laugh filled the hall. "She's got spine, I'll give her that. Takes courage to suggest changing a system that's been in place for centuries." "Or foolishness," Lady Darkthorn muttered, though her tone held less hostility than before. "Time will tell which it is," Lord Shadowmere said diplomatically. "What of your own development, Lady Elena? How do you plan to grow into your supernatural heritage?" Elena felt all eyes upon her. "You know about the ring?" "We know about many things," Lady Nightfall said with a slight smile. "The question is whether you're prepared to embrace what you're becoming." "I'm prepared to try," Elena said honestly, "though I admit I'm terrified of what I might discover about myself." "Fear is not weakness," Morgana said quietly. "Fear is wisdom when facing the unknown." The meeting continued for another hour, with each representative questioning Elena about her plans and priorities. By the end, she felt drained but cautiously optimistic. The council wasn't entirely convinced, but they weren't hostile either. As the representatives filed out, Lady Ironwolf lingered behind. "A word of advice, if I may," she said quietly. "Don't try to be perfect. We've had queens who tried to be perfect. They either broke under the pressure or became so rigid they lost touch with reality. Be yourself, make mistakes, learn from them. That's what real leadership looks like." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you." After everyone had left, Elena slumped back in the throne, exhausted. The ring's warmth had been constant throughout the meeting, and now she could feel new knowledge settling into her mind, understanding of laws and customs that she hadn't possessed that morning. "Well done," Dorian's voice came from the doorway. Elena looked up to see him watching her with something that might have been pride. "I felt like I was making it up as I went along." "The best leaders usually do." He moved to stand beside the throne. "The council is impressed, even Seraphina, though she'd never admit it." "Lady Darkthorn? Really? She respects strength and honesty. You showed both today." Dorian offered her his hand. "Come, there's something I want to show you before tomorrow's ceremony." Elena took his hand and let him lead her from the reception hall through corridors she hadn't explored before, and finally to a door marked with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when she looked at them directly. "What is this place?" "The heart of our kingdom." Dorian placed his palm against the door, and the symbols flared with silver light before the door swung open. "This is where the ancient magic is strongest, where the bloodline bonds are forged and maintained." Beyond the door was a circular chamber carved from black stone. The walls were covered in more shifting symbols, and in the center of the room stood a crystal formation that pulsed with the same rhythm as Elena's ring. "This is where we'll be married tomorrow," Dorian explained. "Not the ceremony the guests will see. That's for politics and pageantry. This is the real binding, the one that will tie you to me and to the kingdom itself." Elena approached the crystal formation, feeling the ring's warmth increase with each step. What exactly will happen? "The crystal will awaken whatever supernatural heritage flows in your blood. You'll be bound to me, not just as my wife, but as my partner in all things. My strengths will become yours, and your unique gifts will complement mine." Dorian's voice grew serious. "It's irreversible, Elena. Once the binding is complete, you'll never be fully human again." Elena reached out to touch the crystal, gasping as energy surged through her at the contact. For a moment, she saw flashes of her own future, herself in a crown of starlight, standing before vast crowds, her eyes glowing with power she couldn't yet imagine. "What did you see?" Dorian asked, noting her expression. "Myself, but not myself. Someone stronger, more confident, someone who belonged here." Elena pulled her hand back from the crystal. "Is that who I'll become?" "That's who you've always been, Elena. The magic will simply help you remember." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Elena spoke. "I have one more question." "Ask." "After tomorrow, after we're bound together, will you love me? Or will I always just be a political necessity?" Dorian turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "I married once before, for political reasons. The woman was perfectly suited to be queen, beautiful, intelligent, well-trained. We were cordial to each other, respectful, but there was no passion, no connection beyond duty. What happened to her? She left after 5 years, said she couldn't bear to be married to someone who saw her as a responsibility rather than a person." Dorian stepped closer to Elena. "I swore I wouldn't make that mistake again. When I decided to remarry, I promised myself I would choose someone I could genuinely care for." "And do you? Care for me, I mean." "More than I expected to after so short a time," he admitted. "You challenge me, surprise me, make me think about familiar things in new ways. Whether that grows into love, I suppose we'll discover that together." Elena felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "I'd like that, to discover it together." Dorian smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious features. "Then we understand each other." As they left the chamber and made their way back to the main part of the estate, Elena felt a sense of rightness settling over her like a comfortable cloak. Tomorrow would bring changes she couldn't even imagine, but for the first time since arriving at Ravencrest, she felt ready to face them. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a good omen, according to Isabel. Elena woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep longer. The ring had been active all night, sending waves of warmth and whispers through her dreams. And she felt different, more alert, more aware of the magical energies flowing through the estate. Morgana arrived with breakfast and an army of assistants to help prepare the bride. Ilana's wedding gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk and silver embroidery, with a train that seemed to shimmer with its own light. The crown that would mark her as queen was deceptively simple, a circlet of silver set with 7 stones, representing the 7 houses, with Dorian's ruby at the center. "You look every inch a queen," Vera said admiringly as the final touches were applied to Ilana's appearance. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," Ilana confessed, staring at herself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at her was elegant and regal, but still recognizably herself. "That feeling will pass," Morgana said, making final adjustments to the crown's position. Power has a way of growing into the spaces prepared for it. The public ceremony took place in the estate's Great Hall, with representatives from all the supernatural communities in attendance. Ilana walked down the aisle on her father's arm. He had arrived the night before with her mother, both of them clearly overwhelmed but trying to be supportive. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," her father whispered as they reached the altar where Dorian waited in formal black and silver. "Are you certain about this?" "As certain as I can be about anything," Ilana replied, squeezing his arm before taking her place beside her groom. The ceremony itself was a blend of human and supernatural traditions, with vows spoken in multiple languages and rituals that called upon ancient powers. When Dorian placed a second ring on Ilana's finger, this one a band of silver that seemed to be made of solid moonlight, she felt something fundamental shift inside her. The crowd cheered as they were pronounced husband and wife, but Ilana barely heard them. Her attention was focused on the strange new awareness flowing through her mind. She could sense the emotions of everyone in the room, could feel the magical energies that connected all the supernatural beings present. "How do you feel?" Dorian asked quietly as they posed for the formal portraits that would be distributed throughout the kingdom. "Different. More everything." Elena tried to find words for the sensations coursing through her. "Is this normal?" "For someone with your heritage awakening, yes. Tonight's private ceremony will complete the process." The reception lasted well into the evening, with toasts from the council representatives and gifts from communities throughout the kingdom. Elena did her best to be gracious and queenly, but she found herself growing increasingly impatient for the public festivities to end. Finally, as the last guests departed, Dorian led her back to the crystal chamber. This time, the space was lit with dozens of candles, and the crystal formation in the center pulsed with eager energy. "Are you ready?" he asked, taking her hands. Elena looked into his crimson eyes and saw not just desire, but hope and determination, and something that might grow into love with time and nurturing. "I'm ready." They stepped forward together, placing their joined hands on the crystal. The world exploded into light and sensation as ancient magic rushed through Elena's body, awakening gifts that had lain dormant in her bloodline for generations. She saw flashes of her ancestors, witches who had hidden their abilities to survive persecution, fae women who had chosen mortal husbands, supernatural bloodlines that had been carefully concealed for centuries. When the light faded, Elena found herself changed in ways both subtle and profound. Her senses were sharper, her awareness expanded beyond the purely physical realm. She could feel the life force of every creature on the estate, could sense the ancient magic that flowed through the land like underground rivers. "How do you feel?" Dorian asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Your eyes." Elena turned to look in the polished surface of the crystal. Her reflection showed eyes that now held flecks of silver light, and her skin seemed to glow with inner radiance. "What am I?" "A bridge," Dorian said softly, "between the human and supernatural worlds. Your grandmother was a moon witch. Your great-great-grandmother was part fae. The bloodline skipped generations, waiting for the right moment to emerge." Elena felt the truth of his words resonate in her bones. "A moon witch? What does that mean?" "You'll be able to draw power from lunar cycles, see through illusions, heal both physical and spiritual wounds. The fae heritage gives you empathy abilities and a connection to the natural world." Dorian traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "You're perfectly suited to rule a kingdom of diverse supernatural beings." Over the following weeks, Elena threw herself into learning her new abilities while adjusting to her role as queen. Her daily schedule included magical training with Lord Silvermoon, combat lessons with Lady Darkthorn, who had warmed to Elena considerably after seeing her determination, diplomatic sessions with Lord Shadowmere, and regular audiences with citizens from across the kingdom. The empathy abilities proved both blessing and curse. Elena could sense when people were lying, when they were afraid or angry or desperate, which made her an excellent judge of character, but also meant she felt the weight of her subjects' emotions constantly. You need to learn to shield yourself, Morgana advised during one particularly draining day of audiences. Feeling everyone's pain will destroy you if you let it.
But how can I help them if I don't understand what they're going through? Elena asked, rubbing her temples where a headache was building. Understanding doesn't require drowning in their emotions, Dorian said from the doorway. He had been watching her struggle with increasing concern. Come, we're going to visit the territories. It's time you saw your kingdom firsthand. Their first stop was the eastern port city of Shadowhaven, Lord Shadowmere's domain. Elena was amazed by the bustling activity. Vampire merchants trading with human suppliers, werewolf sailors loading cargo onto ships bound for distant shores, Fey artisans selling their impossible creations in the marketplace. It's incredible, Elena breathed, watching a vampire child play tag with a human girl while their parents conducted business nearby. They all lived together so peacefully. It wasn't always this way, Lord Shadowmere explained as he guided them through the port. 30 years ago, this city was divided into separate districts. Vampires in one area, humans in another, with strict rules about interaction. Your predecessor changed all that. Dorian's first wife? No, his mother. Queen Liralai believed that separation bred suspicion and fear. She integrated the districts gradually, established laws protecting all citizens equally, created opportunities for inter-community cooperation. Shadowmere's expression grew somber. Her assassination nearly tore the kingdom apart because she had become the symbol of unity. Elena felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. No pressure. Actually, there's considerable pressure, Shadowmere said with a slight smile. But you're handling it well so far. Their next stop was the mountain territories controlled by Lady Nightfall. Here, ancient vampire families lived in castles carved into the cliffsides, while werewolf clans farmed the high meadows and Fey communities tended mystical gardens that bloomed in defiance of the harsh climate.
The mountain folk are proud and independent, Lady Nightfall explained as they toured one of the cliff castles. They don't ask for much from the crown, but they expect to be left alone to follow their traditions. Elena watched a group of vampire younglings being taught traditional dances by their elders, their movements graceful and hypnotic in the torchlight. What happens when traditions conflict with kingdom law? That's where wisdom comes in, Lady Nightfall replied. A good queen knows when to enforce the law and when to find creative solutions that honor both tradition and justice. The werewolf territories in Lord Bloodmoon's domain presented different challenges. The clans were organized around family groups with complex hierarchies and ancient feuds that sometimes erupted into violence. The key with werewolves is respect, Lord Bloodmoon explained as they watched two clans engage in a formal challenge, a wrestling match that would settle a dispute over hunting grounds. They don't follow orders because they have to. They follow leaders they respect. Elena studied the wrestlers, noting how the entire community had gathered to witness the match. How do I earn that respect? By being strong when strength is needed, fair when fairness is called for, and wise enough to know the difference. Bloodmoon's scarred face creased in what might have been a smile. You're doing better than most realize. Lady Darkthorn's military districts were precisely organized and efficiently run.
Here, supernatural beings trained together in mixed units, learning to work as cohesive forces despite their different abilities and natures. A vampire's speed, a werewolf's strength, a witch's magic, a fae's cunning. Properly coordinated, they're unstoppable, Darkthorn explained as they observed a training exercise. But coordination requires trust, and trust requires leadership they believe in.
Elena watched a vampire sergeant training a mixed unit of recruits, noting how he adapted his teaching style to each individual's strengths and weaknesses. What's the biggest threat to the kingdom? What are they training to fight? Darkthorn's expression grew serious. Other supernatural kingdoms that would like to see us weakened. Human governments that fear our growing influence. And internal threats. There are always those who prefer chaos to order. The magical districts under Lord Silvermoon's control were unlike anything Elena had ever imagined. Here, reality seemed more fluid, with buildings that changed their configuration based on need, and gardens where plants grew in patterns that created living spells. Magic requires balance, Silvermoon explained as they walked through a district where witches, sorcerers, and natural magic users lived and worked together. Too little, and we become mundane. Too much, and we lose touch with the physical world. Your role as queen includes maintaining that balance. Elena watched a group of children, human, vampire, and fae, learning basic magic together under the supervision of an elderly witch. How do you teach balance? By example, by showing that power serves purpose, not the other way around. Silvermoon paused beside a fountain where the water danced in impossible spirals. Your natural empathy makes you ideally suited for this. You can sense when magic is being used responsibly and when it's not. Finally, they visited Lady Ironwolf's industrial territories, where the kingdom's manufacturing and trade took place. Here, supernatural beings and humans worked side by side in factories, workshops, and trading houses that supplied goods to both the supernatural and mortal worlds. This is where the kingdom's prosperity really comes from, Ironwolf explained as they toured a workshop where vampire craftsmen worked alongside human apprentices. Magic is all well and good, but economics are what keep a kingdom stable. Elena was fascinated by the complex systems that allowed supernatural goods to be sold in human markets without revealing their true nature. How do you manage the secrecy? Carefully crafted cover stories, human intermediaries who know what they're dealing with, and a few strategic memory charms when necessary. Ironwolf's practical nature was evident in every aspect of her domain. The goal is mutual benefit without exposure. By the time they returned to Ravencrest, Elena felt she had a much better understanding of her kingdom and its people, but she also felt the enormous weight of responsibility that came with ruling such a diverse and complex realm. Overwhelmed? Dorian asked, as they stood on the estate's balcony, looking out over the moonlit gardens. Terrified, Elena admitted. There's so much that could go wrong. So many different needs to balance, so many ways I could fail. Dorian moved to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. My mother felt the same way. Every good ruler does. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I make a mistake that causes real harm? Then you'll learn from it and do better next time. His breath was warm against her ear. Elena, in just a few weeks, you've earned the respect of the council, the affection of the people, and the admiration of your husband. You're stronger than you know. Elena leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his presence. Over the past month, their relationship had deepened beyond the political arrangement that had brought them together. She found herself looking forward to their private conversations, enjoying his dry humor, and feeling genuinely cared for in ways she'd never experienced. Dorian? Yes? I think I'm falling in love with you. She felt him go still behind her. Elena? I know it wasn't part of our arrangement. I know you married me for political reasons, but I needed you to know. She turned in his arms to face him, I don't expect you to feel the same way.
I needed to be honest. Dorian cupped her face in his hands, his crimson eyes intense in the moonlight. You think I married you purely for politics? Didn't you? Initially, yes. But, Elena, somewhere between watching you argue with my counsel and seeing you comfort a frightened child during our territory visits, I realized I'd found something I never expected to find again. His thumb traced across her cheekbone. I love you. Not the queen you've become, but the woman you've always been. Elena felt tears of relief and joy spill down her cheeks. Really? Really. He leaned down to kiss her, gentle and sure. I love your courage, your compassion, your stubborn insistence on doing what's right, even when it's difficult. I love that you argue with vampire lords and comfort werewolf cubs with equal determination. I love you too, Elena whispered against his lips. All of you, even the parts that terrify me. They held each other in the moonlight, and Elena felt the final pieces of her new life settling into place. She was no longer Elena Thorne, the blacksmith's daughter. She was Queen Elena Ravencrest, ruler of a supernatural kingdom and wife to a vampire lord who loved her for who she truly was. But their moment of peace was shattered by urgent footsteps on the balcony stairs. Morgana appeared, her usually composed expression tight with worry. "Forgive the interruption, but we have a problem," she announced. "A delegation from the Southern Vampire Kingdom has arrived unexpectedly. They're demanding an immediate audience." Dorian's arms tightened around Elena. "At this hour? What's so urgent it couldn't wait for a formal appointment? They claim there's been an assassination, someone high-ranking in their court, and they believe the killer came from our territory." Elena felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "An assassination? Like what happened to your mother?" "Possibly." Dorian's voice was grim. "Or possibly an excuse to create political difficulties for us." He looked at Elena seriously. "Your first real crisis as queen, my love. Are you ready?" Elena thought of everything she'd learned over the past month. The delicate balance between the houses, the complex relationships with neighboring kingdoms, the constant need to project strength while maintaining justice. "I'm ready." They made their way to the formal reception hall where 5 vampires waited with barely concealed impatience. Their leader was a tall, elegant woman with dark hair and cold blue eyes that reminded Elena unpleasantly of winter storms. "Lady Valeriana Blackthorne," Dorian said formally as they entered. "This is unexpected. Lord Ravencrest, Lady Ravencrest." Valeriana's gaze flicked dismissively over Elena before returning to Dorian. "We come bearing grave news. My cousin, Lord Dimitri Blackthorne, was murdered 3 nights ago in our capital. Murdered by someone using Northern Kingdom magical signatures." Elena felt the ring on her finger pulse with warning. Her newly awakened empathy abilities were picking up something from the delegation. Not grief or anger, as would be expected, but anticipation and satisfaction. "You have proof of this accusation?" she asked, stepping forward. Valeriana's cold gaze fixed on Elena. "Physical evidence, magical traces, and witness testimony. The killer used moon magic, a speciality of your northern territories." "Moon magic is practiced in many kingdoms," Elena replied calmly, though her heart was racing. "It's hardly unique to our lands." "Perhaps not. But Lord Dimitri had recently been investigating certain irregularities in our trade agreements with your kingdom. Irregularities that someone might have wanted silenced." Dorian's expression remained carefully neutral. "What sort of irregularities? Missing shipments, altered contracts, gold that disappeared from our coffers." Valeriana smiled coldly. "My cousin believed someone in your court was stealing from us." Elena felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. "And you believe we killed him to cover up this alleged theft?"
I believe someone did. Whether it was official policy or a rogue agent remains to be seen. The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Elena could sense the tension radiating from Dorian and the council members who had quietly gathered in the shadows. This was exactly the kind of incident that could spark a war between kingdoms. "Lady Valeriana," Elena said, her voice carrying new authority, "these are serious accusations. If you have evidence, we will examine it fairly. If investigation reveals wrongdoing on our part, we will make appropriate restitution. But if this proves to be a fabrication designed to create conflict, you'll what, little queen?" Valeriana's tone was openly mocking. "Declare war on a kingdom 10 times your size? Send your mixed forces of mongrels and misfits against pure vampire nobility?" Elena felt her newly awakened power surge in response to the insult to her people. The silver flecks in her eyes began to glow, and moonlight streaming through the windows seemed to intensify around her. "I'll do whatever is necessary to protect my subjects and preserve justice," she said quietly. "But first, we investigate, thoroughly and fairly. If you're confident in your evidence, you should have no objection to a neutral examination." Valeriana's eyes narrowed. "And who would conduct this neutral examination?" "The High Court of Supernatural Justice," Dorian said smoothly. "They have jurisdiction over inter-kingdom disputes." "The High Court takes months to convene," Valeriana protested. "By then, whoever killed my cousin could be long gone." "Then we begin our own investigation immediately," Elena said, "with your delegation observing to ensure fairness. Surely that's acceptable if truth is your goal?" Elena could see that Valeriana hadn't expected this response. The southern vampire had likely hoped to pressure them into admitting guilt or making reparations without investigation. "Very well," Valeriana said after a long moment, "but know this. If we find proof of northern involvement, there will be consequences." "As there should be," Elena replied calmly. "Justice demands accountability from all of us." After the southern delegation was escorted to guest quarters, Elena collapsed into the throne, the adrenaline of the confrontation leaving her shaky. "Well handled," Lord Shadowmere said quietly. "You bought us time and positioned us favorably for whatever comes next." "But do you think they're telling the truth about the murder?" Elena asked. "Oh, someone was certainly killed," Morgana said grimly. "The question is whether they killed him themselves to create an excuse for aggression against us." Dorian moved to stand beside Elena's throne. "Either way, we investigate thoroughly. If someone from our kingdom is responsible, they'll face justice. If the Southerners are lying, we'll expose them." Over the next 3 days, Elena threw herself into the investigation. Her empathy abilities proved invaluable in questioning potential witnesses and suspects. She could sense deception, fear, and guilt in ways that traditional interrogation methods couldn't match. On the second day of investigation, Elena made a disturbing discovery. While examining the magical traces from the crime scene, she realized that the moon magic signature felt familiar, not because she'd encountered it before, but because it resonated with her own newly awakened abilities. "Dorian," she said quietly, that evening as they reviewed the evidence in their private study, "I think whoever killed Lord Dimitri has the same magical heritage I do." Dorian looked up sharply from the documents he'd been reading. Moon Witch ancestry? More than that. The magical signature is almost identical to mine, like we're related somehow. That's concerning. "Do you have any relatives you don't know about? Cousins who might have been adopted out? Siblings your parents never mentioned?" Elena shook her head. "My parents have always been very open about our family, but—" She paused, a terrible thought occurring to her. "What if it's not a relative? What if someone is deliberately copying my magical signature to frame our kingdom? Dorian set down his papers, his expression serious. That would require intimate knowledge of your specific abilities. Someone would have to have studied your magic very closely. Or someone would have to have the same original magical heritage, Elena said slowly. What if the killer and I are both descendants of the same Moon Witch bloodline? That could explain the similarity. We need to trace your family lineage more thoroughly, Dorian decided, and we need to do it quickly, before the High Court convenes. They spent the rest of the night in the estate's genealogical archives, tracing Elena's family tree back through generations. What they discovered was both illuminating and disturbing. Elena's great-great-grandmother, Seraphina Nightingale, had been a powerful moon witch who disappeared mysteriously over a century ago. According to the records, she had 2 daughters, one who married Elena's great-great-grandfather and integrated into human society, and another who vanished completely from historical records. Seraphina's missing daughter, Elena said, staring at the incomplete family tree. She could have had descendants in other kingdoms, including the Southern Kingdom, Dorian agreed grimly. Someone with the same magical heritage as you, but trained in different traditions, with different loyalties. The next morning brought a breakthrough. One of Elena's investigators, a vampire with expertise in magical forensics, discovered something that changed everything. The magical signature at the crime scene isn't natural, he reported to Elena and Dorian in the investigation room. It's artificially enhanced, created using ritual magic to amplify and alter an existing Moon Witch bloodline. Elena felt her blood run cold. Amplified how? Blood magic, specifically vampire blood mixed with Moon Witch heritage. Someone created a hybrid magical signature that would be nearly impossible to trace back to its original source. Unless you knew what to look for, Dorian said thoughtfully. This suggests extensive planning and knowledge of both magical traditions. Elena stood and began pacing, her mind racing. So someone with Moon Witch heritage used vampire blood magic to enhance their abilities, then used those enhanced abilities to commit murder while leaving a magical signature that would implicate our kingdom. That's what the evidence suggests, the investigator confirmed. But who would have both the knowledge and the motivation to do this? Elena asked. Her question was answered that afternoon when Lady Valeriana requested a private meeting. The southern vampire's demeanor was noticeably different, less hostile, more calculating. "I have a proposition for you, little queen," Valeriana said once they were alone in Elena's private office. "I'm listening. My investigation has revealed inconsistencies in the evidence against your kingdom. It's possible that the real killer came from within our own court." Elena kept her expression carefully neutral. "That's quite a change from your original accusations." "Yes, well, sometimes new information comes to light." Valeriana's smile was predatory. "I'm prepared to redirect our investigation away from your kingdom and toward more appropriate targets. In exchange for trade concessions, specifically exclusive access to your kingdom's magical goods for the southern markets. We would become your sole trading partner for supernatural merchandise." Elena felt puzzle pieces clicking into place. "You want a monopoly on our trade?" "I want what's best for both our kingdoms," Valeriana said smoothly. "This unfortunate incident could be resolved quietly, with no further diplomatic complications. And if I refuse this generous offer?" Valeriana's expression hardened. Then the investigation continues, and who knows what other evidence might surface. Perhaps evidence of Northern Kingdom involvement in other crimes. Elena stood slowly, power coiling within her like a spring. The moonlight streaming through the windows seemed to respond to her emotions, growing brighter and more focused. "Lady Valeriana," Elena said quietly, "I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about me and my kingdom."